Hello and welcome to your part 2 session of New Historicism, which is specifically about the term power. Uh, New Historicism is really based primarily on a literary theorist named Michel Foucault. A nice French name, right? He said that power is a way of acting upon an acting subject, someone who is doing something, or people who are doing something by virtue of their acting or being capable of action. So while there's a lot of acting going on there, let's break it down and see what this means in more depth. Okay. So power. Power is not merely a physical force, but it's a pervasive human dynamic determining our relationships to others. And just by being human and being on this earth, someone has power over you, and you have power over probably someone else. Okay, like your parents have power over you currently. And you have to think about power as like how you would act differently when someone had walked into the room compared to how you were acting when you were totally alone. And that'll just go to show that there's some relationship between you and the other person, and that relationship is kind of defined by power. Who has more power in that relationship? Power doesn't have to be bad. It can be productive, and oftentimes it is. Uh, we may be willing to assign certain people the power to organize an activity. We need leaders to help us. We don't want to take all the power on. With great power comes great responsibility, right? So sometimes it's really good to have someone in charge of something else, so that we can all accomplish tasks. And you like my picture here? The motivation to paddle. So if you're looking to, in that case, that's a little bit of productive power. Power is also just. It's essential to living in a just and equal society because all people exert a certain power over us insofar as we defer to their needs and desires, meaning we can't just do everything we want to do because it might hurt other people. So we give those people power to kind of hold down all of our like crazy desires to do things. Like I may really want to run down a grocery store and knock everything off the shelves, but I have to, tamper that impulse, that crazy impulse to do so, because it would hurt too many people. Somebody have to clean it all up. It would be a big mess. And in that case, it's justified that that store manager or police would have power over me to stop me from doing things that hurt other people. So the moment we cease to acknowledge that other people do have power over us and should have power over us, then we deny others' humanities or their rights, okay? So every human being has rights, and your rights don't supersede someone else's rights. So this is another aspect of keeping power in check. We have checks and balances, but knowing that you need power, we can't just get rid of it. Power influences you daily. Uh, it can also refer to the way dominant groups exert influence over others on threat of punishment. When you think of power, you often think of somebody having control or they could punish you. But it doesn't need to be actual physical enforcement or a day-to-day basis. So think about this scenario here. You're in the middle, it's at night, maybe midnight, no one's around. It's an empty intersection and you're at a stoplight, okay? And it's red and you can see for miles and no one's around. Do you still stop or do you run it? As many people will just still stop, right? Because we have this power. This dominant group has told us to stop at red lights, and we continue to stop at red lights, even though no one's enforcing it at that moment, and even though no one's around to even make the rule, you know, legitimate, I guess, at that moment. There are also what's called expressions of power. Power can take different forms and expressions. And here are the ones. We have power over. You can control one person or a group through repression or force or coercion or abuse. This is the kind of power that's typically negative, right? That's the one we associate as bad. But there's also other powers that are pretty darn good, like the power with. This is where you work together to find a common ground. You collaborate. You do teamwork. Okay. Power with is very important power. And you have the power within yourself, right? The self-confidence, self-knowledge, personal worth, your identity. Uh, if you have good power within, it usually affects all the other expressions of power. And then finally, you have the power to. This is the free will, potential to shape your life and world. You have choices. Sometimes power over could limit your power to do something, or sometimes power over could limit your powers with or within as well. So really over these literatures, and especially in Macbeth, we'll be looking at how these different expressions of powers affect other expressions of powers. So how does having power over someone affect having power with other people or within or to? Then there are forms of power. There are visible powers, ones that we all know about, like the President of the United States or Congress. These are political bodies, visible. Everyone can see who's in power. But then there are hidden powers. There's vested interests, like lobbyists and backstage, who's pulling strings. Only certain people know who about these hidden powers, right? Somebody whispering in somebody else's ear and telling them what to do. We don't know those, but they're still there. And then there's an even more elusive category called the invisible form of power. And this refers to as huge ideologies. Okay, like femininity and masculinity. This is like a whole systematic, um, internalized social structure, right? We don't even think about it, but it's still acting on us. Like if I'm a girl, I know I have to act in a certain way. It's invisible power. No one's actually like telling me necessarily to act that way, but it's just values or behaviors that have been kind of internalized just from living in society. So these are a little bit harder to explain, but when you do a feminist critique, you're really looking at that invisible form of power, or if you're looking at social criticism, we've actually been working a lot with invisible forms of power. So if we want to apply this to a novel, we could look at Gatsby and Fitzgerald. Which characters have power? Is that power good or bad? Like, is Tom's power good or bad? How does the power of the rich get enforced, directly or indirectly? Does power ever shift? Do the weak become strong or vice versa? So you're looking at moments when power, any of the power forms or expressions that we've looked at so far, are changing or shifting. And also when you're looking at power in new historicism, you might want to look at how much social or political power the author actually has. Are they trying to make a statement or change things or enforce their own power upon a public? And that goes along with, did the novel yield any power over its readers? Does it change their minds? Because literature can be a fantastic mode of social change, as we saw through New Historicism. It changes the way people think, and then it influences what happens. Who is in power during the time when it was published? And is that power challenged? So are they challenging visible power or invisible power? And how are they doing that? So we'll be talking about in live class, we'll be looking at Pygmalion and Gatsby and looking at power shifts and kind of interpreting them from a new historicist perspective.